You're a bad habit to break. It's a hard habit. It's a hard habit. This is about bad habits today. Yes! We got bad habit 2, electric boogaloo. This time we're talking about reading patterns. When we are learning how to knit, how to crochet, how to make all the things with yarn, there's many skills to learn. And a very important one is how to effectively read a pattern. However, like any skill, bad habits can creep in. That includes when it's time to sit down and parse through the written directions for the item that we want to make. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and make with me as I share with you the bad habits we have when we are reading a pattern. All right, so this is a make with me video, which means that I have a project here. Today I'm actually working on this, well, I like to think of it as a stole, but scarf that is actually a project that I inherited from my mother-in-law. This project actually is the one that she was working on when I first met her. That's right, when I first met my mother-in-law, she was working on this pattern, and she was always this was her travel project, and she was always ripping back and never really finished it. So when she passed away a couple of years ago, I was like, can I please have this so that I can finish it with her? And so yeah, I'm still working on it. I think part of me doesn't want to bind off because I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to finish this little journey off with Susan. That is the honest truth. That is how I feel. Before we get into this though, and we start getting into the bad habits, couple of house cleaning things. One, if there's anything I talk about today that you feel like is speaking to you directly, and you're like, but I don't want to change how I do things, then don't. I'm not the knitting police. There are no knitting police. I will not be calling anybody to come confiscate your crochet hooks or your knitting needles. This is just kind of, hopefully a fun way to present some tips and tricks on reading patterns. With all that said, just a reminder, down in the description box, as always, there will be timestamps to different parts of the video. So if you see a piece of advice that you're like, I don't want to hear it, I'm not ready to face that about myself, you can skip that part of the video very easily. Also, down in the description box, I will have links to resources and materials and whatever patterns I might talk about, or anything like that, linked down in the description box. Some of these will be clearly marked affiliate links, so if you click on one of those links to do some shopping, I might earn a small commission. This does help support my channel. Any tips that I get through a commission or through a super thanks or leaving me a tip through Buy Me a Coffee really helps me stay here on YouTube and keep sharing the love and joy of making pretty things with pretty string. So with all that said, I'm gonna just get started on a couple of rows here, and then we will jump into our first bad habit when you are reading a knitting pattern. So first bad habit, I think, when you first get a pattern, not reading through the pattern before you start the project. I'm not gonna say I've always had problems by not reading through the pattern thoroughly before starting, but I will say that there have definitely been times in my life where I would have avoided some heartache, some frogging, so many things if I had just read the pattern more carefully before I cast it on. That doesn't mean that I read through every row by row instruction before I start knitting, because I would just kind of glaze over. But there's definitely things that I skim through the pattern and I look for, and I now make sure to note to myself before I start the pattern. One thing I always look for and make sure I read is any section labeled notes. Sometimes the notes are kind of a blurb on the story of how they made the pattern or what inspired the design, but oftentimes the notes section will have information on particular techniques being used in the pattern, and why those techniques were chosen. So a lot of times knitting patterns will give you a specific cast on to use, and the notes will give information on why that cast on was chosen. And the reason it's really valuable is maybe you don't like that cast on. Does that mean you can't make the pattern, or you're gonna have to like deal with a cast on that you hate in order to work the pattern? No, of course not. This is making things, and there's always more than one way to make something. But what the pattern notes can do is give you information so that you can choose an appropriate substitute. I'm probably gonna say this a few times throughout the video, but patterns are a guideline. They are not assembly instructions, meaning that unlike putting together IKEA furniture, where if you don't put the bolt in the right place, the whole thing falls apart, you don't have creative choices to make. With crochet or knitting patterns, they're a guideline. Yes, there are parts of it that if you don't follow it exactly, you're gonna have structural problems, but there's a lot of wiggle room in terms of how you can modify or adjust the pattern to make it unique to you. And those pattern notes can really help you understand what modifications you can make or substitutions you can do that will still work within the pattern and still make it your own unique project.
Besides notes, however, there are other things I look at before I cast on the project.
I always check the keys to make sure that whatever symbols they're using are ones that I know. If there's something in it that I don't understand, now is the time for me to look it up and research it before I start working the pattern. So when I cast on, I'm really confident that I know what I'm doing. Almost every pattern is going to have a pattern repeat in the row direction. Usually it's denoted by a set of directions that are placed within parentheses, or they're placed within brackets, or they're noted with an asterisk. If it's an asterisk, I highlight it because I have a tendency to skip over the asterisk and miss where the stitch repeat is. Something else I look at is when I'm casting on, if there's a note that the cast on row counts as the first row or not. The convention is that unless stated otherwise, your cast on row does not count. But for various reasons, designers will choose to count the cast on row as a first row. And so that I know that I have an accurate row count as I'm going through, if I need to go back and read my reading. If I need to go back and read my knitting for some reason, I know how to count my rows appropriately. This is a big one for me, needle size changes. This is definitely something I need to look through the pattern and note for, especially, usually I see this with patterns where there's ribbing, like hats, gloves, socks. Most of the things I knit actually will have some ribbing at the beginning or at the end. And oftentimes that ribbing will be done with a smaller needle sizes for reasons. It's very easy for me to miss the change in needle size. So I go through the pattern ahead of time and note where that happens and make sure I highlight that for myself. Because yeah, I'll be looking at something, I'm like, this doesn't look right. What did I do? And I realize, oh, I forgot to change the needle size. My bad. And it's all because I didn't go through and read the pattern ahead of time and note the trouble spots that I needed to know for myself. And that's really what the point of reading through the pattern is to troubleshoot before you've cast it on. So those are some of the things that I look for when I'm reading a pattern before I cast on. I would love to hear in the comments below, what are some of the things that you like to make sure that you make note of before you even cast on for a pattern? My double decrease, knit 3 together. These aren't the best needles, I'll be honest, for a knit 3 together. For a knit 3 together, I actually would usually prefer to be working with pointier tips than my Knitter's Pride carbons. but this yarn is a metallic silk blend. It's very slippery. And I was like, I think I need some more of the grip that I would get from carbon fiber that I would normally get from my metal needles that are super sharp or like really good lace tip needles. So always having to make compromises. That's what it comes down to. All right, so next bad habit for a knitting pattern, I think comes down to actually needle hook issues, especially beginner knitters. Sometimes reads that information on hook size or needle size as like, this is the absolute size of needle or crochet hook that I should be using in order to achieve gauge. And if I don't meet gauge with that needle size, I must be the problem. My tension must be off or must be wrong, or I must be doing something poorly as a knitter because I can't achieve gauge using the needle or hook size that's listed in the pattern. And that is a bad habit. Even when you know that's not true, it still can like be there in the back of your mind that something is wrong with my tension. I think whenever you see needles or crochet hook and it's calling for a particular size or a particular needle setup or multiple setups, I think you should always read in that with this in your head, recommendation. The needle or crochet hook recommendations are a jumping off point. It is a starting point for you to make the pattern so you can start figuring out what needle size or crochet hook size you need to use for your tension, because we are doing a handcraft. We are not machines. We are not all calibrated to make things at the same tension. You might be a looser knitter, you may be a tighter knitter. As long as your knitting isn't causing undue discomfort, then there's nothing wrong with your tension. You just need to adjust the size of your needle to achieve gauge. Something though else in terms of that's specific to knitting when it comes to needle recommendations, and I'm really hoping to see designers move away from what I'm about to talk about, which is a lot of times knitting patterns will give specific directions for the needle setup. So if you're knitting a hat, it'll say, 16-inch circular and a set of DPNs. Or knitting socks, the socks pattern might be written specifically for, a 5 DPN setup. And then you are as the knitter then might feel like you have to follow that same needle setup. I am here to tell you and assure you that you do not. Again, these are starting off points. When I knit socks, unless there's something specific with the stitch pattern itself that would lend itself better to DPNs, I'm almost always going to use 2 16-inch circular needles to knit socks. I don't care what the pattern says. I am not beholden to it. When I knit a hat, I don't use 16-inch circulars. I generally use a 32-inch circular with traveling loop, and then when I get to crown shaping, I move to magic loop. And if you want a video on how I do that, I do have that video. So yeah, break the bad habit of feeling like you need to slavishly follow the knitting or crochet hook recommendations that are in the pattern. This is definitely an area where you get to do what you want to do. So finish this row. Oops, dropped a stitch. That's okay. No panic. No panic in the disco when this happens. Okay, we do not panic in the disco when we drop stitches. We just take the drop stitch, put it back up, remake it, and we're fine. All right, next bad habit. There's an old piece of knitting advice, which is if you're working a project or a pattern or a technique and you're confused, you don't understand what's going on, just do what the pattern says. This may seem obvious, but if you're a knitter like myself, yes, this is another bad habit of mine. If you're a knitter like myself, sometimes I overthink the pattern. Sometimes I try to outsmart the pattern, be like, oh so clever in what I'm doing, and then I cause myself more problems. And I end up going, I should have just did what the pattern told me to do in the first place. I was just trying to be too clever. The other reason this advice is often said is because especially for doing something unfamiliar to ourselves or it's new, we can have a hard time visualizing what the pattern or the instruction is telling us we should do. And so we sit there and we're confused because we can't visualize it. But if you just do exactly what the instruction is telling you to do, it will start making sense and you will see how it works out. And so just do what the pattern tells you to do. This is assuming it's a well-written pattern, by the way. I mean, if it's not a well-written pattern, all this goes out the door. But a well-written pattern will produce what is pictured if you follow the directions, okay? One, two, three. Double decrease. 1, 2, 3. That's the thing. A really good lace pattern is going to have like such a rhythm to it. 1, 2, 3. This one's like a waltz because everything is a 3 count. 1, 2, 3. Double yarn over. 1, 2, 3. Double decrease. We are looking good. Rest row. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na, rest row. This next bad habit is gonna seem like a contradiction to the last bad habit, because if overthinking a pattern is a bad habit, well, underthinking the pattern can't be the bad habit, and in fact it is. You know, patterns are designed for a mass audience, especially garment patterns. The sizing for them are based on averages, and it doesn't take account every unique thing about you, the individual maker, in terms of sizing, in terms of preferences, in terms of all sorts of things. It cannot possibly account for all the possible variations between individuals, okay? That means that patterns require a certain amount of interpretation on our part, the maker. And this is one of the things I really enjoy about working patterns, is I feel like I am working with the pattern designer across time and space. We are collaborating together on my project. They have given me the set of guidelines. They've given me this set of guidelines, and I am now having to actually execute it to suit me, the individual. I just think it's a good idea when you're working on patterns to take a moment and think about why the designer might be giving a certain direction, the why behind it, and then consider if you want to continue on with that idea or if you want to choose your own solution. And of course, when it comes to knitting garments or anything that's fitted in terms of sizing, absolutely, you need to be prepared to make adjustments to the pattern based on the individual that you are knitting that sweater or garment or whatever item for. Sock knitting is another example of this. You know, sock patterns are often written with kind of a average instep in mind, but somebody might have a very high instep and that technique's not going to work for them. Does that mean you can't do the sock pattern? No, you can always choose another technique. You have a pattern that has a short row heel in it. You don't like short row heel fit. You would prefer a flap and gusset. You can choose to substitute a different heel technique and still be knitting the rest of the stitch pattern that's in that sock. You know, you have to do it in a considered manner because, like I said, there's normally reasons why a designer has picked one technique over another, but you as the maker get to make your own choices as well. So don't underthink your pattern, whether it's a matter of fit or just preference and technique. You know, when you're going through a pattern, look at the things that you might want to do differently than what's being prescribed to you. This last bad habit is one I recently came across and I went, oh yeah, I'm totally guilty of this one. And that is not tracking my rows as I am working. Sometimes I'm working a pattern, especially patterns that are like a lot of stockinette. I'll just start working, humming along, happy as, you know, a pig in mud. And all of a sudden I'll look up and I realize, oh, I wasn't counting my rows. I wasn't tracking what I was doing, and I totally missed the shaping, and now I need to frog back, you know, an inch or two, 5. So finding ways to track what you're doing as you are reading your pattern. I admit I'm not one to use clickety clackety row counters when I knit, but I prefer using stitch markers as progress trackers and things of that nature to keep track of my work as I'm working rows. But even on the pattern itself, it's important that I kind of keep track where I am. So if you like to work from a pattern that's printed out on paper, you know, it can be really handy to have a sticky note, and you just move that sticky note with each line of the pattern that you're working on. I myself, when I have worked off of patterns printed on paper, I like to just, at the very least, when I put my work down to take a break, make sure I just put some kind of marker, some indication on the pattern of where I have left off. Now, mind you, I'm skilled enough, I've been doing this long enough that I can look at my work and read it and usually figure it out, but it's just so much easier when I remember to mark it on the pattern itself. There's things like highlighter tape. You can get highlighter tape and use highlighter tape to mark where you are. You can get little highlighter stickers. You can use that to mark off where you are, and you just avoid so many problems when you keep track of what you're doing. All right, so here I am, and you know, I've made, truth be told, I'm probably gonna have to bind this off soon. I think I'm gonna, let me show you. I have this ball of yarn left. I'm kind of tempted to just keep knitting this until I get near the end of this. But then I'm like, I'm gonna have a ginormous scarf, which I personally don't have a problem with. I love a pashmina. I love a really long scarf that I can bundle myself into. But this is also lace, so it's probably gonna stretch. It's gonna grow. So I don't know. I'd probably just not quite ready to let it go. All right, I hope that you found today's video useful, fun, entertaining, what have you. If so, please make sure to share it with your other yarn wrangling friends and to give it a thumbs up. Liking, sharing, commenting on videos really does help support my channel and grow this community so that I can stay here on YouTube. Of course, the most important way, valuable way that you can help support my channel is to hit subscribe. And even if you think you are subscribed to my channel, because I keep showing up in your feed, make sure it's actually clicked. Just make sure you actually have subscribed to my channel, and that way you never miss anything from me. If you'd like to take your support just a little bit further, you can leave me a tip through Buy Me a Coffee, a YouTube Super Thanks, or consider utilizing one of my affiliate links when you are shopping for your knitting or crochet or crafting life. So if you utilize any of those means of support, thank you so much. It is so greatly appreciated. That is it for me today. I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you might be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye.